Get ready, Staten Island. It's time to celebrate 5 years of Ferry Hawks baseball. Join us Friday, April 24th through Sunday, April 26th for our first homestand of the season and our 5th anniversary celebration. Score big with $5 tickets. Grab $5 domestic draft beers. Enjoy $5 popcorn. And yes, 2 Nathan's hot dogs for just $5. Visit ferryhawks.com now to lock in your seats.
Listen, all you New Yorkers. Excuse me, taxi.
Okay, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Well, when it comes to tennis, I basically tune in during the championships, right? During Wimbledon, during the U.S. Open. And I'm always like, man, I should watch more of this. It's a lot of fun to watch. It's very interesting. It's also kind of relaxing. It is. But one thing that's different now, we don't have the charismatic tennis players, in my opinion, that we used to. There were some real superstars out there. Hold on. It just sounds nice. Anyway, the matter at hand right now. Tennis superstar Patrick McEnroe. You've heard of him. I've seen him play on television. I remember when he played his brother John. Everybody remember that match? Well, over the weekend, he was watching the SEC's men's tennis championship between Texas and Mississippi State on ESPN. Okay, again, Texas versus Mississippi State. And there were 12 players on the court. And only one of them was from the United States of America. One of them out of 12. Texas and Mississippi State. That kind of caught me by surprise. That doesn't sound logical. Patrick McEnroe, tennis superstar. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing well, Greg, and I appreciate you having me on. I don't know if I'm a tennis superstar, but I can tell you that I've been around the game for almost my entire life. I'll be turning 60 in a couple months. So I started playing when my older brother, John, who was a superstar, started playing. And anyway, we now run our own tennis academy here in New York City, amongst other things, in addition to being broadcasters for, both of us now for almost 30 years. And I played college tennis, Greg. So did my brother. He played 1 year at Stanford. I played 4 years at Stanford. I got my degree in political science. And when I tell you that things have changed in college tennis, boy, have they changed. And it's not just about, the international players. I mean, there's always been some international players, Greg, in tennis and in college tennis. Of course, tennis is a very international sport worldwide, which is why it's so popular in a lot of other countries in the world, the most popular in a lot of other countries, not as much here. But do you know that only 20 years ago, 70% of the incoming freshmen into Division I tennis, 70% were USA born. You know what that number is today within the last year?
What?
It's down to 40%. Okay, so less than 50% are American born. And I would even say, as evidenced by, what I tweeted yesterday, which, by the way, just blew up on my social media. I was just sitting at home, getting ready to watch the NBA playoffs, the NHL playoffs. I'm a huge sports fan. I have my own show on all sports on Sirius XM that covers tennis, of course, but also, all the big sports as well. And I just put this tweet out because I was watching it on TV. And I texted the guys who were commentating on it because I know them. They have worked for ESPN. And I said, just out of curiosity, how many guys out there, because I was, watching the doubles matches, so there was 12 players playing. And I said, how many are American? And he right away, one of the guys texted me back, 1. And I'm like, I can't even believe this. And then I put it on my social media, and someone, everybody was taking shots at me for this, that, or another reason. Oh, there were actually 2 on the court, or, oh, that's because Americans players stink. That's because we're spoiled. But really the larger issue here, Greg, is like college tennis. And I'm not just talking about tennis. I'm talking about a lot of sports in college, whether it's soccer, whether it's golf, even basketball now. You imagine that, Greg, in the NCAA basketball tournament, there are multiple players there playing for teams that were in the Final Four that are foreign born. And do you know why they're playing in college now? I'll give you 3 guesses. The first 2 don't count.
Huh. Why are they playing? Say that question again.
Yeah, they're playing in college basketball because they're getting paid huge amounts of money. Now, that's not the same in tennis or, let's say in soccer or wrestling. I mean, wrestling is predominantly mostly Americans, but even in women's college tennis too, the numbers are similar. By the way, these top tier schools are dominated by foreign players because generally speaking, there's more better tennis players coming from Europe. So now they now see the opportunity to come play for a university. It's not so much about the money for the tennis player as it is for, say, the basketball player, but it's about, great training, ability to get an education. Yes, it can be a pathway to develop into a professional player for both Americans and international players. But really the problem we're facing in this country in tennis, and I think it's going to continue into other sports as well, is that we've sort of lost the plot in that we're not really looking to use college to develop players. So these coaches, you can't blame the college coaches in tennis because even though it's not a huge revenue sport, in fact, most universities lose money in almost every sport they have, Greg, with the exception, of course, of football and men's basketball. Pretty much every other sport at a university, and tennis is actually on the low end of the scale. I saw a list from Alabama just recently of their budget. They make hundreds of millions of dollars from their football program, and I think they end up making about $80 million. And tennis is they lose about $1 million a year. That's actually the lowest of most of the major other, not major sports, but other sports that are played by college teams.
I'm surprised.
Yes, no, it's interesting. I'm sure there's some universities, that are big in hockey, let's say in the Northeast, like BU and BC, and, in the Midwest, with Denver just won the national championship, or in Iowa, there's wrestling, so some of those sports, probably make some money at certain times. But for the most part, these sports are losing money. And I think it's just, to me, something that has to be addressed because we've professionalized college sports without really building a professional system around it.
Well, I'm surprised. I'm surprised about the tennis, especially. I mean, 2 rackets and some tennis balls. How can you lose money on that? No, I understand it's complex, but let me ask you this. When I first saw this tweet, and I know you said you're getting pot shots and whatever, I said, okay, there's something fundamentally wrong with that. You know what I mean? I felt it in my gut. You can't have, this is not right. But once you get beyond that, just tell me again, what is the problem on its surface? Why should people be upset about that?
Well, I think because, it's not just about tennis. It's sort of about identity of our institutions, fairness, and development in American sports, right? And I think that's why people have reacted as strongly as they have from all different backgrounds, not just, a lot of people obviously that follow me on social media are tennis fans, but for them, and for parents, right, that are putting their kids into whether it's our tennis academy or, travel soccer, whatever the sport is, they're spending a lot of money. They're spending a lot of time and effort, and they want to see, they may have dreams that their kid could become a professional. But for the most part, and I see this at our academy, Greg, they want their kids to be well-rounded people. They want them to have an opportunity to get a college scholarship. And maybe if they have money, they just want them to be able to play a sport in college, to go to an Ivy League school where there's no scholarships and play the sport. So now we're losing these opportunities, and many in the tennis industry feel we will lose the opportunity to get more kids into tennis if the parents don't see that as the carrot at the end of this stick of their kid, spending all this time getting on the bus, going to tennis practice, playing for their school, signing up for tournaments. And I think you can see that in a lot of other sports in addition to just tennis. And I think that's why, people are like, wait a second, aren't American universities supposed to be about developing our kids? Of course, we welcome international kids to a certain level. I mean, all universities do that for a multitude of reasons. It's some of it for financial reasons, right? And also for research and all the things that go on in a lot of big-time universities. But I think that's why this struck a chord. To me, I was just sitting around yesterday, as I said, on a Sunday afternoon, relaxing at home, and this thing just exploded. My phone was just blowing up.
Yeah, no, it's right there at Patrick McEnroe. follow him on social media, and you said it again. I'm currently watching the SEC's men's tennis championship between Texas and Mississippi State on the ESPN SEC network. There are 12 players currently on the court. One of them is from the United States of America. One of them. And it just feels fundamentally wrong. You know what I mean? This is America. I mean, it's actually okay to have quotas. You should have quotas or something like that. Hey, what was it like going to Stanford?
Stanford was amazing. I mean, I lived the dream. I mean, we grew up playing tennis in Queens, and our parents stressed education, and both my brother and I were lucky enough, because of tennis, to get into Stanford, and B, to be able to get a scholarship to play. But in those years, and in most colleges in those years, Greg, we built teams, we developed, we stayed in school, and that system produced a lot of professional players, but more importantly, it produced great people. And I think that's the danger now. You add the NIL, which is a way players can get paid now in the bigger sports like football and basketball. You add the transfer portal where kids can just jump from school to school based on who's paying them more. And it's not just that it's become global, it's become transactional. And I think that's what coaches of all sports, but particularly I call them the Olympic sports, Greg, the sports that are not, why do you think there's no international players in football, American football? Why do you think that is?
That's a good question. I have no idea. They're too skinny in Europe, number one. They're just skinny over there.
They don't play the game in any other country in the world. That's why, okay? Huh. So tennis is a global sport. Obviously soccer is, but soccer has more professional leagues around the world where players can get paid starting at teenage years. But the most interesting thing to watch for me now is basketball. Because basketball, traditionally the best European players would be able to play sort of semi-pro ball in Europe. And now they can come and play for making up Michigan, Duke, Ohio State, and make million. In fact, the place where 18 to 20-year-olds in basketball can now make the most money playing basketball, where do you think it is? It's college sports in the United States. So that will get more people's attention down the road than tennis does, because everyone's, tennis is an elitist sport. Nobody cares. It's a country club sport. They're rich kids anyway. Well, most of the players that are coming from Europe are not rich kids. There's more opportunities for them to play, and without as much expense in Europe, because it's just a more popular sport. And the other problem is these players are coming to play college tennis at the age of 21, 22. They're coming in as freshmen, as players in their early 20s. And that's problematic for the 17-year-old, 18-year-old kid who lives in, I'm making it up, Topeka, Kansas, and wants to play for the University of Kansas or Kansas State, or where the dream would be to play for my local university. Well, that dream's becoming unreachable now for a lot of kids, not just in tennis, but in all sports.
Now, we know President Trump is sensitive to this stuff. He was just tackling a college sports issue with a bunch of college sports heavyweights at the White House not too long ago. I think it was more about football. What would you ask him to do? What should he do? What can be done?
Well, that is the $64 million question. I've never liked the quotas, but I do think that there might be a place for that, where they say there could be a cap on the number of players. Say a percentage of players. They do this in European soccer. In the Premier League, you can only have X number of international players. You have to have a bunch of English players. Or incentivize local universities. The University of Florida, for example. If they got, 2 or 3 players from the state of Florida on their team, maybe they get something from, the government, or they get some sort of payback, as opposed to just saying we should put a cap on, because there's all sorts of legal issues. You probably know a lot more about that than I do. Is that legal to do that, to say you could put a cap on it? Does that come from the NCAA? Does that come from Congress? Where does it come from? But I do think we're getting to the point where something has to be done legally to address this issue.
Patrick, real quick, you are the president of the International Tennis Hall of Fame. Where is that?
That's in Newport, Rhode Island. And this summer will be... the Hall of Fame will be inducting a man by the name of Roger Federer. So we're expecting lots of attention. It's always at the end of the summer, right before the U.S. Open gets underway, which is, as you know, at the end of the summer before Labor Day weekend.
Can I ask you a couple of quick kind of questions I always wanted to know about tennis?
Sure.
Why the fixation and the controversy around white? You got to wear white. Why do you have to wear white? And why were people so upset when I guess it was Andre Agassi or somebody like that who, started not wearing white. What's the big deal about white? Or
well,
what
the
was
reason,
it?
Because when tennis started, which is there's still debate, did it start in the lawns of the kings of France or in England? But part of the reason that there was whites, because they were royals sort of playing, or the ultra rich played, so they wanted to look dapper. And then the interesting part about it, the other thing when it started, like Wimbledon began at the end of the 1800s, that they didn't want to see the sweat, because it was supposed to be like a civilized game. So if you wear white, you don't see the sweat. And that particularly was part of the reason that they did it at Wimbledon, because they didn't want the women to be, when women started playing tennis, they didn't want the women to be seen as sweaty. I mean, could you imagine? So the white sort of stayed as a tradition in, some country clubs in tennis. At Wimbledon, there still is predominantly white. But for the most part, everywhere else, you can wear basically whatever you want.
That's a pretty classy move now that I understand it when you think about it, all right. How about you and your brother at the same, in the same dining room, it's just amazing. All that tennis talent under one roof. Was this, I think the Venus Williams, like the dad, decided, I'm going to make my two daughters tennis champs, right? According to the movie, at least. Did your father, was that his ambition for you guys?
Absolutely not. He had no idea of anything about tennis. He was a relatively poor kid from an Irish immigrant family growing up in the city. He happened to make it because he was a brilliant guy and became a lawyer at a big law firm in New York City. And when that happened, Greg, as my parents got married pretty young, like many of that generation, my dad was in the Air Force in Germany. And when they came back and they were in their early 20s, they got married, they settled in Flushing in an apartment. When my dad made partner, about 10 years into his career at the law firm, they moved to the nicer part of Queens, Douglaston, and then the Douglas Manor, which happened to have a small tennis club called the Douglaston Club. And John, when he was about 8 years old, I have another brother named Mark who's in the middle. I'm the youngest. They said to him in the summer, well, you could either try swimming or tennis. And he played all the other sports. He was great in basketball and soccer and so on. He was already very athletic. And he first said, well, I'll try swimming. I'll try something different. He hated swimming, went back, played tennis, and the rest was history. And I just followed my brothers, Greg. I did whatever they did as a younger brother. So I actually started hitting against the wall with an undersized racket at 3 years old at the Douglaston Club. So that's how we got started. But we played all the other sports, even through high school. We played on our teams in soccer, in baseball. I loved baseball. I was a pitcher and a shortstop. But it just so happened we happened to be pretty good at tennis, especially my brother.
Well, it's amazing. It really is amazing. What a great New York. What a great American story. And how about that with your dad and the military? And hey, times are simpler. You got married in your 20s. What a beautiful concept. What a beautiful thing,
Yep.
Yeah. Patrick McEnroe, at Patrick McEnroe on social media. This thing really did capture the attention of a lot of people and needs to be addressed. Patrick McEnroe, thanks for being with us, sir.
Really appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Greg.
You bet. To be continued, and we'll be right back.